Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. It's 6 p.m. in London, and as a British man and very punctual, this is 6 p.m. So we're starting today Black Talks. So just let wait some people to get here first. Hello, João Bezerra, tudo bem, querido? And just you guys wondering what a Black Talks about it and who I am as well. Oi, Murilo, tudo bem? My name is Thiago Ayers, or Thiago Ayers in Portuguese. I'm a psychologist and founder of Tono Lab. I'm Brazilian originally, and I live in London for 13 years. And for a long time, I really kept these stories for myself and my struggles of being a black foreign man in this country. But the recent events in America and also in Brazil is just making a lot of people all over the world really to reflect about our system and about racism and lack of diversity in our society. So we've talked with friends and colleagues and professionals from America and in UK, Brazil. I start realizing there is a lot of similarities regardless the culture and the country, and we all fighting the same fight. So yesterday I interviewed Warrenzo Johnson. He's from London. He's an entrepreneur. And during this week as well, we're doing a series of interviews with very interesting people from different backgrounds and different professions, and sharing these insights and empowering each other and finding solutions together as one community. My sister Anica, welcome. Oh, I'm so happy, and I'm so happy to have all you guys here as well. And I can see slowly we growing a small family, an international small family all over the world. So today we interview Dr. Anica. She's like, as me as well, she's a psychologist, but she's in the north side of the world right now. She's in New York, and she works as well with diversity and in organizations in America. And we've been having very interesting talks and very insightful as well. So we decided to have this interview so we can share these ideas and share these insights on this project. So I'm just gonna call her now. Just before I call Dr. Anica, just 1 second. After yesterday discussions, some people have been asking to some of the reference that I have with the discussion about racism and especially in America. And then I mentioned this film, The 13th Amendment, that I watch on Netflix. So I absolutely recommend everyone to watch. It's a very interesting documentary, but very complex as well, and full of like nuances, and it just really showed the complexity of racism in America. But I believe as well through extension we can understand a lot of the racism problem in the UK, in Brazil. So it's very insightful. And another a reference that I had yesterday as well that I mentioned and people ask me, but specifically about the history of slave trading in the UK. So this is a documentary is being produced by Timeline. So what was Britain's role in the slave trade? You can find that on YouTube, but also is great and very insightful and bring many different angles and many different perspectives like to discussion. Okay, so that's all. I can see that Dr. Anica, she's already in, so let's call her. There we go.
Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, I need to put the headphones. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Hi, everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
You as well.
How is it, New York?
Well, I'm actually in Florida right now, but
Oh my God. Yeah.
but New York, from what I hear, is good. We're getting our summer is starting to come in, so that's really exciting.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you guys in the middle of the summer now.
Well, summer's not official until this weekend, but the weather is definitely warming up. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of the summer, but as you know, like in London, we practically don't have summer.
It's really strange.
Actually, I can show really quick right now. So it's very cloudy.
Yeah.
You might be very familiar with
I am.
it.
I am. I
So
always
first
bring my
of all,
jacket with me, my spring
yeah,
jacket.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You always have to be ready, London, for everything.
Exactly.
So, first of all, Dr. Nika, thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be here and to be part of this project. I believe that is something that is really important for us, not to have a voice, because I believe that we already have a voice, but
Yeah,
to share the voices and these stories and share these stories with other people as well and find insights together.
absolutely.
And as a first thing, I'd like to ask, and myself being a psychologist as well, asking to another psychologist, why psychology?
So, I like stories. I've always liked stories, and I like learning about people, their lives, and what they've done. And so, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to be a pediatrician because I was like, I'm going to
Yeah,
work with kids and I'm going to do all this stuff. And then I took, in America, we have something called AP, which is like advanced placement courses.
yeah,
And my senior year of high school, I took an AP psychology course, which was my first introduction to psychology. And I felt like
yeah.
this is the way that my brain works. This is exactly how my mind works. And so,
In school, did you
huh?
take the subject in school?
Yes, I took the
Yeah,
subject my senior year of high school. And so then I thought, I don't want to be a pediatrician. And I don't actually like biology all that much.
yeah,
So I decided that I wanted to pursue psychology. And so I talked to my teacher at the time, and he encouraged me to go all the way and get my doctorate. And so I did. So I went to college. I studied psychology there. And then after I graduated college, I went into a doctoral program and got my degree.
yeah. And but taking consideration that you decided to go like through this career path and being a black woman in America as well, and through this whole contest that we have in America with racism and discrimination. What are your thoughts as a psychologist, like in that
Yeah.
scenario?
So for me, just on a personal note, like one of the things I wanted to do in becoming a psychologist is I wanted to make the information that we studied and researched into practice. And I wanted to
Yeah,
take it and turn it into something that was actionable. I had seen for so long that conversations around race just often devolved into something very unproductive and very negative. And
yeah,
people were just looking for how, and I just felt like no one was answering that question. And so in
yeah,
becoming a psychologist, I felt that it would help me have access to
yeah,
information, help me have access in a way that perhaps a lay person doesn't, and use those skills, use that information to then
yeah,
come back and talk to everyday people about how we can come together and actually change
yeah.
this thing that we've been dealing with for over 400 years, do you know?
Yes, but racism and diversity is always like something is always in the back of your head, like since when you start your degree and
Yeah, so
how your whole project like you do with diversity inclusion organizations, like how this process actually started for you is something that in the first year of university you say like, that is what I'm about, and I'm going to do research and I'm going to
yeah.
investigate and that's going to be my line of work. What was how this process worked for you?
Yeah, so I knew that going in, I wanted to do something around race. And so all of the projects that I would take on or any assignments that I had, it was all centered in some way in relation to race relations. My
Yeah,
dissertation was focused on how does racial identity impact academic achievement. And so it was always centered around how does one's racial identity, one's awareness of race play out in some respect or another. When it
yeah,
comes to Race Positive, which is the company that I started, again, I just discovered positive psychology and just learning about the fact that there are strengths within us. And if we can grab onto those strengths and foster them, then that helps usher us into a space of true wellness and true health. And I
yeah,
felt again that was a field that they were talking about hope and zest for life and love of learning, but no one seemed to be attaching it to race. And again,
Yeah.
wanted people to just not only do a better job of talking about race, but actually
Yeah.
make some positive, sustainable change in that area. So I
Yeah.
pulled my understanding of positive psychology together along with my clinical work, because in my work with clients, I'm talking to them about how does race play out in their own lives? How does
Yeah.
the racial dynamic of society that we're in have an impact on some of the things that they're dealing with and they're seeing? So I had all this
Yeah.
clinical experience. I had the research background for my dissertation and stuff I'd done in grad school.
Yeah.
And I'm learning about this field of positive psychology. So I just put them all together, and
Yeah.
that's how Race Positive was born. And through
Yeah.
that, I've been doing a lot of work with the public as well as on the private end to help.
Yeah, so you have a mix of different platforms where you work. You work either with organizations, but if with individuals as well, doing your
Yes,
clinical psychology and in and out institutions, in schools.
exactly. So it's definitely a mix. I've been brought in to speak to faculty, whether it's professors or the lower grades, and just
Yeah,
talking to them about how do you bring, again, your understanding of race into the classroom. One of the
yeah,
programs that I co-developed was around how can we really equip professors, teachers to be more
yeah,
mindful about navigating conversations around race in the
yeah,
classroom, regardless of
yeah,
what topic they're teaching. Do you know? Because
yeah,
I don't feel like they're separate. I think you
yeah,
can't force it. If you're talking about math, then we have to talk about how mathematics and economics have been used
yeah,
to oppress racial groups, right?
yeah,
That's an appropriate through line that we can look at. So I don't feel like any topic is divorced from this
yeah,
conversation of race. So that's one thing I've been able to do: work with faculty and staff around how can they increase their own awareness, their own comfort, their own willingness to talk about race relations, and
yeah,
then use their sphere of influence to help improve that. On the other side, I've gone into with nonprofits, and I've worked to providing training to the people that they're serving. One of
yeah,
them was called FedCap, and they were just working with a lot of marginalized people who've had really tough times and wanted to come back into the work field. So I went in, I
yeah,
talked to them about privilege, I talked to them about racial
yeah,
microaggressions, how they can be aware and take care of themselves as
yeah,
they go on interviews, as they, manage and they deal with society and the challenges that they're facing.
yeah,
I've been able to do something called Race Talks, which is an initiative I created. And that's really where I invite the public in, and we sit
yeah.
in a huge
So it's
circle.
open. So it's open to public. The race talks.
Yes,
They
so the
like
Race Talks.
workshops, and anyone can join. And
Anyone can join, and so there's and there's usually a fee attached to it, but this
yeah,
weekend it's free, so I'm offering it as a free
amazing.
to
Oh,
everyone.
amazing. Yeah, yeah.
Happy to
If you want to give the
that.
details now before we forget,
Absolutely.
like to
So
people that you come out over.
yeah, so if you want, it's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is going to be a bit late for you guys, which is about 11 or so your time. But we'd still love you to come. You can simply just go to my website. It's Dr.
Yeah,
Anica, that's
yeah,
DoctorAnica, and you just click on Race Talks with Dr. Anica on the media
yeah,
tab there, and you just register, and it's free.
yeah.
So just jump on it, and I'll type it in too, so you can you can.
Lovely, lovely. Oh, Anika, there is so many things I would like to ask you, and as I mentioned before as well, there's going to be ongoing conversation, and and I really want to learn more from you and for your experience and your research. Uh, Talking about psychology specifically, the one thing I do, and you might understand that as well, it's really hard to work with generalizations.
Mm.
And because obviously every coach or every organization, they have, many different elements and it's very complex. So it's really hard to come up with, like something, that is like how you guys should deal with it.
Right.
But there is many people in my circle, and then probably going to watch this video as well. And a lot of them, they business owners or managers, and they have teams of people. And especially like in London as well, we have a very diverse city, as you know, people from many different culture and backgrounds. But just as I say, it's really hard to make generalizations, but just like some few tips that you would say that come like first in your mind when someone is managing a diverse team and how they would deal with racism and lack of diversity to the extent as well in a workplace.
Right. So I think what's important, and you're right, it's hard to give a formula that says, copy and paste and apply into every single organization. But I do
Yeah,
think that there's certain principles that can be replicated across
yeah,
the different organizations. So one of those is going beyond aesthetics. A lot of times when people think of diversity, they just think of, oh, we have all different colors sitting at the table, we're diverse. But diversity means that you're able to that person brings a unique thing to the space that you don't find in another person, right?
yeah,
And without that person's presence, the dynamic would change. So I
yeah,
would first ask yourself, if we were missing Jackie from the round table, how would this conversation be different? And if we
yeah,
don't know, then that means we probably need to do some work on finding out
yeah,
how Jackie, based on her background, based on her framework, helps us. And if it's not helping us, we need to do a better job of making space for her to do that. Do you know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
So a lot of times, again, we get stuck just thinking about, do we look diverse enough? But that's just a very small part of diversity.
yeah,
By virtue of existing in the skin that they're in, has a perspective, has a framework, has a lived experience that others, by virtue of living in the skin that they are in, do not have.
yeah,
And that's okay, but we want it and we need it. And when you're thinking along those lines, the next step becomes, what's missing? What don't we have? What haven't we considered?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
then you can now have initiatives that are centered around recruiting and bringing more people in who can, again, expand not just the look of the company, but
Yeah.
the diversity in mind and understanding and approach to the company that
Yeah.
makes it really
Yeah.
successful.
In a way that you're describing now, I'm just like wondering, for example, and I think it's a brilliant example as well, when what you're saying that someone that is not just the look diverse, but someone that actually bring a different perspective as well, and with like the own story and background and to the table. Uh, Thinking that way, do you think like diversity could be a strategic tool to companies? For example, like when you have a situation that you have a specific project or problem to sort out, and then you have people with like different backgrounds and different visions and ideas. So instead of having someone that just thinking in the same way, so having people with like different angles and different knowledge and different backgrounds and culture to come up with like a solution and bring innovation to the company. Do you think that would be diversity in that way is a strategic tool?
Yes, I do, and then I don't, all at the same
Mm,
time. And here's what I mean by that, right? I think if we have a diversity committee whose job it is to really look into the different houses that exist in
mm,
the company and try to give some sort of try to integrate all of that in some way, in some sort of cohesive way, then I think that's helpful. But
mhm,
I think it could be a little bit detrimental if we just have the diversity committee and they are alone responsible for
mm,
diversity and the rest of us are just existing in our own worlds. Then
mhm,
you can see how you're divorcing the everyday work of the
mm,
company from diversity when I don't think they can be truly divorced. Do you know what I
mhm,
mean?
mhm,
So put in a little bit more of a practical language. If I have a company and I've got 3 different offices, then in each of those offices, I need to make sure that we're actively thinking about how can we be diverse in our thinking, in our makeup, in our initiatives, um,
mhm,
in our customers, whoever it is that we are serving in these particular departments. And then the
mhm,
diversity committee have representatives from each of these departments coming together saying, so we are working on this end, we're working on this end, we're working on this end. Okay, as a whole company, what should we keep in mind given these 3 initiatives that we've got going? Do you see what I mean?
mhm.
It's
Yeah,
really more of of an overarching space that brings together a unified sound that
yeah,
these minor departments are already executing, um, already doing. So it
yeah,
doesn't feel disjointed and it doesn't feel as though we've sort of outsourced our
yeah,
responsibility around diversity to the diversity committee, but I'm
Yeah.
still being microaggressive to my staff. I'm still,
Yeah.
not allowing people who don't look like me to move up in this company. That sort of
Yeah.
thing isn't helpful, right?
Yeah.
Even if you have a diversity committee.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. No, that's great. There's all really interesting points, and I believe that it's so interesting to hear everything from you. That especially like there's someone that really got experience on hands in organizations and with individuals as well, and to bring these insights. And this is really important. So just moving a bit forward with like the subject of racism and with the recent events in America, and which is one of the reasons as well, I think that we having this collective reaction with people all over the world and having this debate and conversation about races. So specifically about George Floyd in America, and you as a psychologist and professional and Black woman, what was your first impressions in reaction to the situation?
It was heartbreaking, right, to see somebody just killed like that and so callously. So it was really heartbreaking. Then, of course, you felt outrage, right? You felt anger. And then
Yeah,
there's a bit of cynicism because historically there has been no consequence really for the officers who do these sorts of things. And so
yeah,
it was great, of course. Here's another person dying and
yeah,
nothing's going to happen to this officer.
yeah,
It's kind of that sort of feeling.
yeah,
But then to see the reaction and to see the engagement of the public along
yeah,
the line of asking for justice and pushing for justice, that brought hope, right? And it brought a sense of okay, maybe something is going to be different. Maybe something is changing
yeah.
here. And
Yeah,
I think in a way that having COVID was sort of a I guess a silver lining, right, of COVID could be the fact that for the first time, everyone was forced to just stop and pay attention. Like we didn't
yeah,
have distractions, we didn't have all these other things going on in our lives
yeah,
to keep us away from looking. We were all forced to look and to look in real time. And I
yeah,
think people finally looked, they saw that there was a lot of injustice that was happening, that was
yeah,
going unchecked. And I think if you have any sort of sense of morality, any sort of understanding of fairness in you,
yeah.
your heart
And
can't help
compassion. Yeah,
react. Yes,
yeah,
you can't help but react and think this isn't okay, this isn't right.
yeah.
And so I think
Mm-hmm.
being forced to pay attention helped more people to become engaged, and that is showing in the
Yeah,
marches, in um, the calls for change that we're seeing all around. So from a
yeah,
psychological perspective, I think people in particular in the Black and Brown communities who've seen these injustices happening for years on end without any due process, without any real justice coming, there can be, again, like you said, the sadness that happens, a sense of rage and anger that comes out because it's like, again, a
yeah,
sense of cynicism because of the idea that it's almost never accounted for, but then a sense of hope as you do see finally some
yeah.
action.
Yeah, yeah. This is one of the points I was discussing with Lorenzo yesterday as well. As this professional from London, and we, to be honest, we kind of like balancing between like these two sides of like hope that something is actually going to change, or a little bit of cynicism that if it's actually going to change. But you personally, what do you think? There is change coming?
It feels different to me. I do feel like there is some hope for change. I think what I will say is a concern of mine is, you know, 4 or 5 years ago when Black Lives Matter was first sort of spoken, when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling,
Yeah,
people who did not want to have the conversation around race
yeah,
co-opted the conversation by making an argument around the slogan and not about the substance. So they started
yeah,
arguing about, well, Black Lives Matter, well, no, all lives matter. So you just kept going back and forth around the name and not about what the name is really speaking to. And then they
yeah,
took it further and it changed the conversation altogether, and it stopped being about police brutality and it became
yeah,
about the flag, and if you're disrespecting the flag, or do you support the troops, which has nothing to do with the actual substance of the conversation. And
yeah,
so now I think we've moved past that, where people can say full-throatedly Black Lives Matter, and no, it's not about the flag, it's about police brutality. But my concern is that I feel like again, those people who don't want to have this conversation are now attempting to co-opt another phrase, which is the defund the police phrase. And so
Yeah.
making all the arguments about defund the police, you want to get rid of the entire police, we'll have no law and order, we'll have no justice, nothing in our society, which is not what that's not what it's about. And so that's my fear. My fear is that we've moved away from making Black Lives Matter a super political statement to one that most people can say without hesitating. But
Yeah.
now we're making defund the police and that phrase
Yeah.
the new thing to fight about.
Yeah.
Again, spearheaded by people who don't really want to talk about the true issue, which is police brutality and systemic racism.
Yeah, this is one of the points I was discussing with my partner as well, because probably if you come like to the police team that murdered George Floyd and come to them and ask like if they're racist, they would say no. I mean, actually, the guy that murdered George Floyd was married to an Asian woman. And
Yes.
before that, or even today as well, if you come to him, he'll say like, I'm not racist. But then I believe that when you're thinking about society in general and racism is something, sometimes it really manifests in between the lines, and it's very systematic and structural as well. And it manifests in so many different levels that it's really difficult for us to tackle with just one hashtag or just one simple movement. It has to be like very complex discussions. But another thing that you pointed out as well, I think is very important, and I think is going to lead to this third session of the interview, is how these dialogues are important. And then with everyone all over the world, and all of us, we have a role to play on this process, like finding solutions together as a community, and not just like simplify the discussion and just pointed out who is the villain, who is the hero, but really like understand like the complexity and as a community finding solutions together. Dr. Anica, so how do you think, as a psychologist as well, and I remember that we started this conversation, why did you choose psychology? But now looking yourself in the future, and I believe a lot in the social role that psychologists like play as well in our society. How you can see, and there is a lot of friends of my Honey, including Hania Roberta. Hello, she's my friend from Brazil. She's a psychologist herself. Hello, Hania. How do you think as a profession and in all over the world? I mean, I know that each country they have their own differences, but how do you think we can play a role in this problematic and in this dynamic?
So I think we have a very important role to play, actually. I think just thinking on an individual level, if you're sitting with someone in therapy, one of the things I always do, and I encourage all the psychologists watching to consider using it in their work, but in that first meeting with the person, we do something called consult, or you may call it a triage or something like that. This is prior to the intake where you get their whole life story. But in that first initial just 15, 30-minute meeting of getting to know them and finding out what brings them in, one of the things I'll ask their demographics, I'll ask about if they're in a relationship, I'll ask what their faith or religion is, but I'll also ask how do they identify racially or ethnically. Now, I know outside of the U.S., that's not a very big question that many people ask, which is fine, but perhaps thinking about in your particular culture, what is a substitute for that word that best reflects what it's after may be helpful. But I ask the question to everyone, and I love asking it to my white clients because so often they're not aware that white is a race. So often they'll look at me and say, Caucasian, I guess, while everyone else who has, is part of the racial minority group in the U.S. will say without a heartbeat, oh, I'm Asian, I'm, whatever. And so I ask that question because for two reasons. One, I don't want to impose my idea of you on to you. I want to know how you see yourself. But then two, again, for that awareness, that realizing that we move through space and time in a body that has a skin, and that skin color there are narratives that are assigned to that skin color before we
Yeah.
even get a chance to assert anything about ourselves. And that
Yeah.
assigned narrative is going to shape how we live and how we experience the world. And so from the very beginning of my work with clients, I ask that question because I'm aware that how they see themselves and that skin that
Yeah.
they're in is going to show up, whether they're aware
Yeah.
of it or not, in so many things that happen, from whether or not they feel pressured to prove themselves in the classroom because they assume people may not think that they're smart. Well, that might be rooted in, again, racial stereotype, where because you're black or brown, people don't think you're smart as you actually are. So you have to work harder to prove yourself. Well, some of that depression and anxiety that you're feeling when you're having to take on academic tests may be in part motivated by this systemic pressure of needing to prove yourself worthy as a person of color. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all very connected. It's all very linked together.
Yeah.
And the same for a white person, you know, like them being able to understand that, yeah, you have certain privileges, whether you ask for them or not, that have been assigned to you based on your skin color. And that is going to
Yeah.
shape how you see the world, how you're, when
Yeah.
you're telling me about the kid who's always complaining and why you don't understand his perspective, realizing that maybe he's had things that you haven't had to deal with may help you to build empathy for him,
Yeah.
to renew that relationship in a way that you couldn't have if you didn't have that perspective. Do you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
of course we're talking about things that are personal to them, and we're not just sitting talking about racial theory the whole time, but I do think that it's important, even from the beginning, to really frame and see that person as part of
Yeah.
a larger culture and system, and
Yeah.
how they fit in and their individual story fits in, and
Yeah.
having impacts on their lives. So that's one thing I think that as psychologists we
Yeah.
do. But in another perspective, it can be just recognizing that things like racial trauma, that's real, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
that the weight, like whether you've been the target of racism.
What is racial trauma? I mean,
So
like
racial,
the concept in
yeah,
that
so racial
extent.
trauma really refers to the physical and psychological effects that a person can experience as a result of facing either like an overt hate crime, whether it's something workplace discrimination or some sort of act of violence
Yeah.
toward them, or it could be sort of these everyday repetitive occurrences of microaggressions that
Yeah.
can happen, or discrimination, or you know, things like that that can have that build up over time but really have an impact on the person's sense of self and their identity. And the thing with racial trauma is that you can experience it whether you are the recipient, like the direct recipient of the hate crime or of the racist act yourself, or if you're watching another person experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, even though we weren't George Floyd, simply watching George
Mm-hmm.
Floyd be murdered
Mm-hmm.
can create racial trauma.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so that
Absolutely.
that experience, you know, has an impact, and then it shows up in us physically, it shows up in us psychologically. So you can be depressed and anxious. You can start feeling hypervigilant. Like every time you go outside, you're very nervous or weary of your surroundings because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Very similar to PTSD. Think of what PTSD symptoms are like, and really just slap the label of
Yeah.
trauma in many ways
Yeah.
onto it.
Yeah. That is definitely, I think, even like the subject of like mental health with the Black community and talking out all these amazing elements that you add into this. This is a very important and relevant discussion. For example, when I was looking at the George Floyd, and then as well, there was a lot of things that happened in Brazil that you might be aware. The young Black kids have been murdered in favelas in Brazil, and is when you watch scenes like this, for example, like me personally, and thinking of myself as a Black man in Brazil, but then I'm still talking for a privileged kind of place because you know I was adopted like by a white woman, and I had opportunities to create a base and a life for myself, but my story could probably go to a completely different direction.
Yeah.
And then like the first reaction when you see George Floyd in America or João Pedro, like the little boy in Brazil as well that
Yeah.
was assassinated,
Yeah.
it's really hard to watch these things. And then as being a black person as well, and then you automatically feel related to it.
Absolutely. And I
It's
think,
so many different details. There's so many different elements
yes,
that we can
yes.
add to the discussion.
And I think what you're saying too, right? I think what the last thing you said, which is as a black man, and the reason I think that is so important is that when we think about, again, this racial trauma that I'm highlighting, it's very different from just humanity, right? So
Yeah,
so many people of all different races will have looked at that video and just felt, like you said, a stirring and a sense of outrage and injustice. But when
yeah,
you belong to the racial group that that man belongs to and you identify with him on a racial identity, then that has a way of kind of going a little bit deeper into you.
yeah,
You don't just feel like, oh, that's a terrible thing to do to a human. Now you kind of see your face on his face. You start to worry
yeah,
about your own sense of safety and your own sense of survival, right?
yeah,
So the trauma hits you deeper than just sort of this, oh, that's sad and that's terrible and I'm disturbed and I'm upset about it. It's
yeah,
very different nuance than it would if you did not feel connected to him on a racial level and knowing that his death was because of his race. If it was because of an activity that he was doing and not at all to do with race, and you would be upset that someone was killed that way, but the way that it
yeah.
hits you internally hits it very differently when you're like, wow, I am him. That feels
Yeah.
very, very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Nick, I'm gonna have to finish. I mean, unfortunately, we have
Sure.
like a very short time, but what I feel, and I'm saying this from my heart, we are just planting a seed here.
Yeah.
And thank you so much to share your knowledge and to share your experience. You definitely made this project. It's a small project. It is just a small drop in the ocean, but you already broke so many different aspects, so many different angles. And thank you so much for being part of this. Just to conclude as well, if someone needs to find more about your work, so what is your website? So how they can find more about you and about your
Yeah.
projects?
Yeah. So my website is dranica.com. I'm going to see if I can type it in the chat right here so you can see it. And it's doctor spelled out.
Okay.
And when you go on there, you'll see I have a bunch of, if you're looking for books to read about race relations, I have put up books that I have given reviews on. It's like
Lovely.
reviews, and they're books I've read them all. So any book that's on there is a book that I've actually
This is really important.
yeah, so it's like I'm not
And
just
they
endorsing
save a
books
lot of they save a
that I
lot
found
of
in there.
time.
I've
There is
actually read them,
yeah.
and I'm giving like sort of like my three big takeaways from those books, and it's under the
Lovely.
tab what you're reading, so you can just click on that,
Yes.
you can see it.
Oh,
Under the
amazing.
tab of race talks with Dr. Nika, you'll see the flyers for all the
Yeah.
race talks, including the one that's happening on Saturday. You just click on it and you can register right there on the page, and you get it. And as far as the services tab, if you click on the services tab, you'll see the workshops that I offer. You'll see more about the race talks and other things if you're looking to work with me, or if you have information or something that you would like to have me collaborate on, that's another possibility too.
Lovely.
And coming later this summer, I'm going to open a private practice element. So I'll be taking on therapy clients for individual and for group therapy that's
Yeah.
centered around talking about stuff like racial trauma and
Yeah.
sexual identity stuff. So we're
And
excited.
do you do online as well consultation? If someone, for example, like in another side of the world, like for example, like from the UK as
Yeah,
well?
so if we're talking about like the workshops and that sort of thing, then absolutely, I'd be more than happy to do that with anybody anywhere. The
Brilliant.
therapy bit, you have to be in New York because that's where my license is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, sure.
But
Absolutely.
as far as like
Absolutely.
the consulting stuff and the training stuff, yes,
Yeah, for
100%. Do that
organizations, yes.
anywhere.
Absolutely brilliant. Dr. Nika, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's been
Pleasure.
absolutely pleasure. And I'm waiting for you here in London so we can have
Yes,
that tea together.
absolutely. Sadly, I had to
Any,
cancel my trip because of COVID, but I will be there.
yes, lovely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye bye.